Mute you. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm going to pop the webcam on just so they can see. Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Gute. Gute?
Yep.
Okay. All right. We're here. We're going to get started. And I will turn it over to you.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Everybody in the room and everybody, I guess, in TV land today. It's too bad you're not all here because there's a s'more station right outside our door, so I hope you all have a good snack out where you are as well. So today we are going to focus on especially writing the dissertation because it obviously is the biggest bear you have to wrestle with in a doctoral program anywhere. However, I'm hoping that many of the things we talk about will also serve you in one way or another as you're working on course assignments and kind of building bits and pieces of the dissertation. So today Brenda is going to serve as kind of a question moderator. So if at any point you do have a question or you would just like me to pause and talk a bit more about any of the slides, please, you're able to communicate and just type it in and she will pass your question on to me so that we can talk about that. So please don't feel like you're interrupting if you'd like to do that at any point. Also, I'll be asking you from time to time to pause to think about things or even do a little bit of revising on some examples of things that we're going to look at here today. So let's go ahead and get started. Well, at least if I can figure out how to advance the slide.
Yeah, and
arrow key doesn't seem to be.
We just have to get back.
Is it different mode? Or?
Now, if you hit the arrow key, there you go.
Oh, okay. All right. What I've done here is divided our time together today into several sections. One is the focused doctoral student, one is the productive doctoral student, one is the ethical doctoral student, and one is the precise doctoral student, because those are all I have found some of the biggest considerations and the biggest demands on you, especially when you're creating the dissertation. So getting a focus is where I'd like to start today. And I know that some of you right now are at the stage where you're just considering what are you even going to pursue in doctoral research? What is a question that would be worth doing and one that you can live with? Because it's kind of like, you know, almost like picking a mate. I guess you don't necessarily have to live with a dissertation that long, but it's still a big undertaking and it's a big deal. So let's just start by talking about a few of the criteria for topics that are worth taking on, and then we're going to move through the considerations that go into a dissertation roughly in the order that they need to be considered, although it's a circular thing. You may be pretty far down the line and realize, wow, for a particular chapter, you almost have to go back to the drawing board and restart the planning. And that happens, but in some ways, there is a logical, rational, kind of linear set of steps that will help you to follow, that'll make the whole thing a lot less stress-inducing. And the first is that topic selection. So a couple things I would suggest there. If you have a burning passion in an area, or you are really, it matters a lot to you to provoke change in a certain area, or you have a certain political viewpoint, it's possible to be too close to a dissertation topic. It's possible to love it too much. I have worked with people at the Writing Center at UNI, where I work with many graduate students, who have chosen something where they're really not researching. They're presenting the case that already has lived in their minds for many years. They're not really discovering anything new. If there's no room for genuine inquiry and discovery, I wouldn't pick that topic for many reasons. A topic, second, should be significant. It should have, and I think everyone in this program, I already know, is concerned about practical application and value. So certainly something with a high degree of that would be very important. As we go today, part of being focused is limiting your topic, and there are certain ways to do that, to put boundaries around it so that you're not taking on something that's impossible to accomplish in the time that you have, and that's impossible to stick together in a coherent project. And that's certainly true of class papers, and that's where many of them aren't at the level of quality they should be because they're not really as limited or focused as they could be. And then people worry a lot about the originality factor, that, is what I'm doing really original? If you keep in mind that there are different ways to be original, you don't have to invent something, you don't have to have the cure for a particular disease. It may be in the way you focus or the way you apply a new method to something that's already been pretty heavily researched. There are lots of new angles to explore out there, or maybe different populations that haven't been as understood as they could be. So certainly that would be a good area to consider. And then being realistic about your own expertise and the way you research. I myself would not take on a quantitative study where I was going to do heavily statistical analysis because I don't have a lot of expertise in that area. I'm a qualitative researcher. My thing in my dissertation, it was all based on a couple things: semi-structured interviews, going to sites and talking to people, case studies, some survey, lots of review of historical documents. Those are some qualitative kinds of things to do. Observation, that's a qualitative thing. The two can be melded together very successfully, and a lot of people do mixed method stuff, which can be very good. So I would not try to inflict something on yourself that would demand a methodology that just is not really within your area of expertise or comfort. And then finally, again, it's got to be something that really drives you in a genuine curiosity sense. And we're going to talk a lot today about making a question out of the topic ideas that you have. So for those of you who are really just starting the program and you're thinking, well, the dissertation, that's a long way off. I can put that off for a number of months, years, potentially. Honestly, the best thing you can do is start thinking about it right now. Not in the sense of writing it, but every time within a class or within your practice that an idea comes to you that you think, this could be something I really want to investigate, or it's just a question you're curious about, just write it down. You can stick it into the notes on your phone, or maybe you have an application for note-taking, or there's nothing at all wrong with an old-time actual notebook or planner to jot things down in. But then you have a treasure of possibilities, and then I see so many people are kind of struggling. Well, they have to do a dissertation, but then it's like, I have to pick a topic, not, wow, I have all these questions that have come to me, and this is the one that I would really like to explore in depth. So finding your way to preserve those ideas is going to serve you really well later on. And there are some other ways to really help get the lay of the land and kind of survey. If nothing kind of organically comes to you because of the experiences you have, then certainly just informally reviewing some literature. You're reading a lot of articles in your classes, I presume, and taking a look at those recommendations. What are people calling for out there in your field? Here's where more research is really needed, and here's what kind is needed. Maybe you can answer that call. Locating the gaps in the research. Where are people just not publishing a lot? Where have you attempted to find answers to your questions about educating or any number of things and have not been able to find an answer through research, or not a sufficient one? Those are good ones to take on. And then just chatting with the faculty that you have, running ideas by them. A lot of times that will prompt them to kind of open up and talk to you more than you ever imagined about potential sources you could use or ways you could focus a topic. And then once you have that list, it makes it, that inventory makes it very easy to kind of sort and weed out the ones that aren't going to work. And to figure out if they're going to work, I always recommend that people make a kind of a procedural outline in order to do this topic in question justice. What would be all of the kinds of sources of information you would need? What would be the method and the procedural steps? If it looks impossible to you to do, don't pick that one. But sometimes you don't know that until you've put in the time to do that kind of planning. So I can't read anyone's mind out there. We have Margot, you're here live today. When you, let me just pick on you a little. When you think about doing the dissertation, how does that feel in your gut? Are you excited? Are you a little anxious, a little nervous, a little, what would best describe?
At this point, I'm excited for sure.
Great.
So it's more, my anxiety is more with dealing with the family throughout work. But I'm actually excited. The more guidance, literature, and the other coursework, the more I want to start writing. I feel very
good.
I would like to do that stuff up.
Good, and that helps a lot. Although Margot mentioned one concern I think everyone will have, and that's, you know, I think you're all working, you're all taking classes. How do you make time for a dissertation? In my own doctoral life, I commuted to do my coursework. I actually found that the most difficult and anxiety producing, but then I love to write and research, and by the time I got to the dissertation, I was pretty excited to do it, but it was a huge undertaking. It was kind of stressful in that regard. And then it grew to 360 pages, which I wouldn't really recommend for anyone, but that's, you know, you kind of follow the leads that are important to you. Some of you writing may not be as naturally enjoyable to you, and so you might kind of, you know, as you think right now about any anxieties you have with it, I mean, there are some tips that work for everyone, but within these you can find your own way to manage them. And one is establishing a writing schedule for yourself. And writing, if you can, at the same time and place every day. And I know that's not always possible, but you can always do something. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in just a minute. Okay. There is something called free writing, and sometimes that means sitting down and just actually writing kind of in sentences, nonstop, without having any concern about what it looks like or if it's any good, and it can be really messy. I don't do that so much. I tend to be more a listy type of a person, but one or both may work for you. But the point is that anybody can do that at any time. And no one is going to be looking over your shoulder or judging it. And the stuff you crank out today in free writing form may be the fabulous, polished chapter of tomorrow, but you have to start somewhere. And then keeping that some kind of format, whether some kind of app for your phone or your tablet or a notebook to write down thoughts as they come to you. I can't tell you how important that was to me in my dissertation writing process. At 360 pages, as you can imagine, the thing was just really complicated. There are a lot of parts to it. And so I had to find a way to plan it out, to make a map. Sometimes not even of a whole chapter, but just a section of a chapter. And there were pieces of chapters that didn't make any sense when I would go back and read them, so I had to find a way to get that under control and get it to make sense. And sometimes a lot of times, I wasn't even working on the dissertation, but something would pop into my head that, oh, that will help me connect those two things together, or help me explain. So you have to be ready to capture that stuff before you forget it. For some people, that might mean, I think everyone's phone probably has a voice notes option. You can do that anytime as a reminder to yourself. And that may be something that will be very useful later. Some people like to put different parts of the proposal or different chapters of the dissertation in different computer files, just kind of break things down into smaller bits and make things more manageable, and you can shift things around easily. And then, very important to write the easiest sections first. And I don't know what the easiest section is for you. There have been times when an idea came into my head, this is how I want to introduce this chapter. And I started from there because it's all I had. The rest of it was a struggle. Other times, it's very difficult to even try to write an intro first. It's much easier to slap some stuff down in the middle of a chapter or some paragraphs and then use that to build in an introduction. So you do not have to write things in the order that they are read. And that really applies to class projects too. A lot of times you can write a much better intro if you've already pretty much drafted the body. So we go on about this because in working at a writing center now since 1997 and teaching writing since way back, like 1983, which proves that I'm aging rapidly. I don't believe in writer's block anymore. I do believe that people have it and they talk about it, but honestly, there's no reason for it. The only reason that you might experience a case of what feels like writer's block is that you're doing two things. You're worrying about the quality of what you've written, and you're worried about the outcome of what you're writing. You have to worry about both of those eventually. But there is a time and place when it absolutely is counterproductive to think about either of those two things. When you're at the point of just starting to do a draft, absolutely you should turn off your critiquer because it's not going to help you. Being willing to make a mess, I can show you stuff in my office up at UNI right now that you would never ever believe came out of a writing coordinator, because it's nothing. Some of it's on Post-its. I am quite serious when I tell people that I wrote a chunk of the conclusion to my whole dissertation on a subway napkin, a stained subway napkin, because that's when the ideas came to me. And now what we're going to talk about along the way today is how you do craft those things into something better that an audience will be able to understand and absorb. But at first, you have to be willing to just get it out there where you can work with it and make it better. And even if that means, like in the slide here, just over and over writing some nonsense until the ideas get flowing again, it actually does work. So you can do something on a dissertation or a class paper every day. It might be one paragraph you've been struggling with drafting. It might be an outline to a section. It might be a few random thoughts that you think you can turn into something better, but you can always do something, and that keeps you moving ahead. But if you dwell on, I have writer's block, I have writer's block, I have writer's block, it's not going to happen.
One question, and
yep.
Something that you had said earlier,
yes.
Writing the introduction.
Yep.
Can you expand on that it's okay to write introductions last, and sometimes that is the appropriate time to write it?
Sure. I think it's important to always start with just one piece of an intro, which would be at least your rough statement of thesis or purpose. And someone's asking to repeat the question.
And
is that what you're doing now?
I'm going to type it in.
Okay. Okay. You need to have an idea what you're focusing on, and we're going to very shortly look at some examples of that. But an intro is more than that. It doesn't just state what your purpose is. I also have a few things to share with you specifically about writing the introduction. But the introduction, there's kind of an art to that. It needs to do several things well, and one of them is to establish your whole point for writing. And sometimes you're not even sure what that is until you've actually explored. So, Margot, do you kind of have an example of that?
No, I was just going to say it was interesting when I first started in the EdD program.
Yeah.
Our course was extremely writing intense.
Yeah.
And it was funny because it was the intro that I would then go back and fix. Because
yes.
you might have an idea what the purpose of the paper is, but you still don't know how to organize it. And one of them was when I let go of writing the perfect intro and just work on the paper, doing the Quentin Tarantino where I write in the middle, jump and back and forth, it was easier to write.
Yeah, and then now that does mean later there is the work that you have to take it in hand as an editor and get those pieces in the right order for the reader to make sense of it. But absolutely, for you, there's also the idea that the more we write about things, the more we understand them. And as Margot was just saying, that means that that intro should look different. It can't be perfect before you start the actual paper, because if you're really doing your job, that intro changes in light of everything that you fleshed out in the body of the paper. And then you go back, you refine, and you make it better. And in conclusions, the same way. I mean, it's kind of senseless to try to write a conclusion before you've really thought through everything else. So a lot of this is working back and forth and being adaptable and changing pieces of your writing in light of other pieces developing and getting better. And
Oh, some people can hear you fine and others not. And since you're adding to the presentation, like
think this is a little small on screen, but I'll walk through it. And there are a couple slides today that are not totally legible on the slide, so I'm going to send those as an attachment to everybody who was involved in the webinar today. There's another one later about various types of plagiarism from Turnitin.com, so this and the other one, and anything else that I can send, we'll do that after the webinar. Something that I used in a couple of courses that I taught here in the spring was called the PICO planning system or planning tool, and it can be a good way to start conceptualizing. If someone doesn't assign a topic for you in a class or for your dissertation research, how do you go about shaping this question? So the P in PICO stands for what population and problem are you interested in healthcare and healthcare education, and what does that, what kind of situation are we talking about? What inspired your interest? What professional context is it? The I would be what kind of intervention are you interested in researching? Some of you may be doing an experimental design or an intervention of some type, or you want to investigate some that already exist. And so that helps you kind of also narrow the focus and the scope. C is something you may do. You might be comparing one kind of intervention or program or approach to another. That's a very common thing that happens in doctoral research. If you're doing an experimental design, you have to have a comparison group of some kind. But don't forget the O. What kind of outcome are you hoping that research like this would accomplish? What is it that you desire to come from it? And how would the population you're looking at be affected by the intervention? In clinical situations, that could be looking at the effect of some kind of treatment protocol, but in your case, it may be, I know one of our possible topics is e-portfolios. What impact does that make in certain areas? So, but that just gives you kind of a way to think through some of your potential topics. And like I say, I'll share this as a handout too if you would like it. So here are example questions. These are two that people submitted to me in classes last semester, and their concerns were more with clinical practice, but they are two examples of good, focused questions. You just can't possibly exaggerate how important it is to start a research paper of any kind with a good question. So one was, what interventions and protocols reduce post-surgical site infection and complications? And what are some causes of differences in adherence rates between schizophrenic patients using one kind of medication versus another? So just take a minute and look at those. And think about what do you see in those that make them good quality questions? If you were in the room, I'd ask you. If you have thoughts, Margot, please feel free to share.
Well, you have the population,
Okay.
schizophrenic, you're comparing
Yep.
medication versus injectable.
Yep.
And I would guess your outcome is to figure out what's going to be best for the patient.
Okay. Yep. Yep. So it has real world implications. You can kind of see that built in.
Or this one person chimed in and said the second is more researchable.
Okay. And I'd be interested to know, by researchable, what do we mean? Would the person like to elaborate a little bit? they flash on and disappear. So yeah. Yeah.
Terms can help focus on search strategy.
That's a great point, because one of the reasons we're spending time on good research questions is that the more specific and precise your question, the easier your search is, because if you only have vague keywords to type in to whatever search engines you're using, then you're going to get way too many hits, and you're going to get things that are not really focused on what you're interested in. So that's very important. Both of them are good in the sense that they are open-ended questions. Sometimes I see doctoral research with a question like, are oral medications better than injectable medications in treating schizophrenic patients? Where do you go with that? Are they, aren't they? Yes. Too limiting. You don't want a yes or no question. You want something open-ended, but yet something that's also quite directed. So I did put on the slide 3 topic areas that were shared in our pre-workshop survey for today. And these all look like interesting areas to explore. So I thought we could take maybe a little bit of time and work with these a bit. Right now, a couple of them are almost questions, and they're solid topics. So in your dissertation work or for a major class paper, the process that works best is to take your topic, transform it into a very precise question, and then in the ultimate document, you may have your question also, but then you want a very specific statement of purpose, and we're going to look at both question and purpose coming up here. If you are doing a regular class paper, your thesis statement is a little different usually than the purpose statement in something like a dissertation. As we'll see in just a minute, in a dissertation purpose statement, you pretty much want to whack people over the head with something really obvious and say the purpose of this dissertation is, and be quite blunt about it. In a class paper, you're making more of a statement of a finding or a conclusion. So we could look at that first example about service learning. In a class paper, it may be enough to have a focusing statement that says something like, let's say you were assigned to investigate service learning, that's all you were told. So it's up to you to create a focus out of that. So your thesis statement could say something like, service learning is a transformational teaching methodology used to develop cultural competency. And then you would expect that your paper would explain how is that, how do you mean? How, for a dissertation project, we're doing something different. Okay? We'll look at an example coming up here. First, we need questions. Okay? And I'm going to invite you in just a minute, if one of these is yours and you're out there in webinar land, to give it a try to actually transfer your statement into question form. So before we do that, though, think about the examples we just saw, and think about anything you might do to make these even more specific. Now, if you are coming to me for writing feedback, I would have a conversation with you, and I would probably ask you a bunch of questions in order to help you fine-tune your research question. Out of questions comes questions, more questions. Okay. So, for example, service learning as a transformational teaching methodology. I might wonder in teaching what and where. Cultural competency, I would wonder how that might be defined. And then if that writer thought about answers to those questions, might it shape your way of turning that statement into a research question? Think about that for a sec. Now the second one, how it could benefit nursing students to receive training in the cultivation of compassion, is almost a question. And then the third is about e-portfolios in an RN-BSN program, usefulness especially related to using for advancement of employment and educational purposes. I'm going to invite Margot, you're present, and everyone out there right now to pick one of those. And if it's your own, all the better. But if you don't have a question just yet, just pick any one of the three. Doesn't matter. And try your hand at crafting a research question you think would be the maximally clear and specific. But it must be in question form, like Jeopardy. Okay, give you, okay?
Nothing yet.
Okay, so give you a couple minutes. If you've got your printout, just scratch it out, and then when you feel ready, type it in, and then Brenda will share them, or we'll see them, or I'll see them, or something. Margot, do you want to give a shot of writing one out, and then you can share with us? Good question. One person asked if they should be the same as the ones on the slide. Let's pick from one of the ones on the slide right now, but then I'll leave a couple minutes and we'll maybe, I'll give you a chance to submit one or two not on the slide as well. So for now, pick one of the three up on the slide. Because all three of these have good makings, so you've got stuff to work with. Okay.
Okay. Good. I just let everybody know. Some things are going just to the presenter account. I'm coming closer to the mic. If you think I've been ignoring you, it might be because you're sending private messages to Brenda Presenter and not the other Brenda. So make sure that you're sending your replies either to everyone or to the Brenda not listed as the presenter. I think Tanya might be sending. Talking to the presenter. There we go. All right. So Tanya says, I was going to do service learning, but I am now researching empathy levels in dental students and services provided to impoverished patients. I was going to do service learning, but I am now How can service learning be incorporated as a transformational methodology to develop an understanding of varying cultures?
Okay, so some things to think about there would be how can service, phrasing is good, how can service learning be incorporated? Like think about aware, probably room to even get a little more specific. And sometimes you don't know when you're just starting out until you do some preliminary research. So, but that's headed in the right direction.
We have one, is service learning a more effective teaching methodology than traditional classroom methods to teach culture in nursing?
Okay, good, good. That builds in a comparison, so that definitely improves its degree of specificness. Could you say it one more time?
Is service learning a more effective teaching methodology than traditional classroom methods to teach culture in nursing?
And that would be a good example of a great question to begin the process, and then it would raise some additional questions about more effective as measured how, and then that question could get more refined, and then we'll see how that shows in the purpose statement.
Here's another one from Lisa. What are the benefits of using an e-portfolio in an RN/BSN program to advance employment and educational opportunities?
Okay. Good. But you can see as the questions are coming in, just the act of phrasing them as questions gives you an instant degree of more focus than you had before.
I'll put it in the chat for you so that you can see them.
Okay,
Sometimes
sure.
it's easier to,
Yeah, they flicker and disappears.
I'll move this over here. And then if you want me to make that small again, I can. So here, okay, so I just read that one. Here's the next one.
Okay, how would nursing students benefit by receiving CBCT training in the cultivation of compassion? There, it's not only now a question, but there's a specific kind of training under examination, which is very good, which would also make your search easier as well. And then, how do empathy levels in dental students compare to oral care for impoverished patients in Iowa? That one is really on the right track, but I would ask, so would we be comparing empathy levels to oral care? I'm not sure. I want to clarify what Tanya's thinking there. And that would be something everyone would need to examine in a question, like are you comparing equivalent things? Or maybe is it, Tanya, do you want to kind of clarify, since you have now switched your topic to that, this is a great one to look at, I think. What two things would you like to compare? Can I, if I didn't want to, if I use,
Services offered or volunteer.
okay. If Tanya wants to submit anything else, feel free. Otherwise, we'll. Is she down there?
She did.
Okay.
There's her additions.
Oh, so different sites. So comparing empathy levels in different sites of practice, is that I can, yeah, I think that's beginning to be clarified some now. That's good. And then in RN/BSN students, what is the difference in the relationship between e-portfolios for advancement of employment and e-portfolios for educational purposes? That's definitely a few degrees more specific. My only question would be, is it in the relationship or is it in the required content of them, or the, probably I would just clarify the relationship part. I'm not exactly sure with what part of the portfolios is being compared, but the rest of that is really good. We have a more specific thing to look at. Am I missing anything?
There was one up above from Jennifer. She said, what intervention
could benefit nursing students in the cultivation of compassion. Okay, good, clearer than the original one. The only suggestion there would be to think about how you'd like to define benefit. Like, what interventions and protocols bring about the greatest change in something in the cultivation and compassion. I don't want to try to read your mind there, but that would be a way to even fine-tune more to help narrow the research. What kind of area of benefit or compassion is measured in what way or demonstrated in what way, and then maybe you could build that into the question. So, but all of these are definite improvements, definitely on the right track. Oh my gosh, look at that. That's a great example. Now we've achieved much more specific. Yeah, exactly. That's a good, I feel like, yeah, you pulled the trigger and hit dead center there. How does the cultivation of compassion decrease compassion fatigue? Now we've even got something, we've got it measurable, something either quantifiable or describable in another way. We've got the population narrowed down. And these are great examples of how we all start kind of vague at first, and then it gets more and more precise the more thinking you do. And that didn't even take long. I mean, some people struggle for weeks just trying to narrow their questions down. So that's a good day's work. So, but yes, there's more. However, I'm just going to X out of this for now and move on to the next, because now with more precise questions, how did we get to the view?
Put the arrow like over the transforming topic. Put it on
Here.
the PowerPoint, and then click the mouse button, and then that activates that.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if you want to go to the PowerPoint.
Okay. Yep. So what we're doing is kind of looking at small pieces and finding ways to force the simplicity into something really, really complicated. And a dissertation is very complicated. And so it helps to think about the very conventional way that dissertations and journal articles and even a lot of class papers are always done. They have certain parts, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can, it's like the basic human anatomy. We all have a kind of the same skeletal structure, but you know, the variety of what human beings look like and are like, it's kind of infinite, yet we all have that same underlying structure and system. Same with this kind of writing. You're always expected to have an intro. You're always expected to have observed a problem of some kind, and that gives rise to your question. Then that question becomes a purpose statement. Some of you might be testing a hypothesis if you're doing something quantitative, experimental. You're all going to review literature. You're all going to have to describe your research methods. You might have a section hitting at definitions. You're all going to have to address the significance of your project. And Brenda, do they do like a 3-chapter proposal? Okay.
Yeah, so it's a typical 5-chapter.
Yep. Okay, different programs kind of have different requirements in that way. And so once you have built the 3 chapters and you're talking in future tense about what you plan to do, then you do the study, you write 2 more chapters, everything goes to past tense, and you have these additional sections, findings, discussion, maybe recommendations for solving a problem or for future research, and being sure that you really hit once again and expanding on why your project has been significant, and that helps with that summary and closure. So before we talk about taking these good questions you have and turning them into purpose statements, I want to talk a little bit about embedding that in the context of a problem, because something gave rise to your interest in these questions. And it's very much like going to a healthcare provider and presenting with some issues. Like, I have a cough and I can't get rid of it. What's the deal? And so the doctor or nurse makes observations, describes the symptoms. You have to do something very similar in a dissertation. And that means the problem as it exists in practice or in life. And you can also pay some attention to what's missing in the research. That's part of explaining why your project should be done.
Yeah, would it be okay to tell them, if they want to work through their questions further?
Yeah, sure. Yep, that'd be part of it. Up through the end of this semester, I'm still available for individual writing feedback for students in the program. So let's say you did want to revise a research question, just send it to me at the email that we sent out earlier in the semester. I could certainly do that. So types of problems. I think we all in this group are really working on actionable problems, things in practice of some kind that need to be better or that are unknown. And so we'll kind of leave it at that. So now we get to, I mean, there's quite a bit yet to cover here today, but I consider this probably the most important after what we just did with the questions, because this is what drives every part of your dissertation. And once you have this nailed down, it makes the planning and the organizing much, much easier. It's your expression of what you're actually going to do about your question. It states the what, the where, the who, and the how. It implies something about the method that you're going to use to do it. And the best way I can help with that is, again, to show some examples. Example 1, I'll just tell you, this isn't going to fly. So I'm going to give you a minute to look and see what you notice. With a variety of differing opinions about the best course of action with regards to clinical approaches, the question needs to be asked to determine what best suits professionals working in the field. Think about what are some things in there that need to be pinned down and specified. If you'd like to type any in right now, that would be great.
You hit a little chat bubble that's orange right now up at the top.
This.
Chat window, yes, that will open the chat window.
Okay. I see we've got another interesting question added there, so I'm good. What questions need to be asked exactly? Doesn't say. And the purpose would have to specify what the central question is. Or maybe the question comes before the purpose statement. What else would need to be defined in that one?
The field.
Yeah, what field are we talking about? And even if you think, well, it's nursing, even that, what's the problem with just saying nursing, Margo?
Well, again, nursing covers a lot of different areas, a lot of different fields, a lot of different settings. So it's still not specific. How you practice is going to change. So you practice the neonatals not going to be the same as how you practice in orthopedic. I'm assuming
Exactly.
not a nurse.
Yep.
So my nursing practice
But yep, exactly. There are just too many different variations. And what best suits professionals? Well, what result? It doesn't say anything about what results we're aiming for. So take a look at example 2. I want to educate healthcare workers and caretakers on how to care for people with muscular dystrophy and about the treatment and medication options available, and whether they really make a difference in slowing the progression of the disease or are more harmful. Well, Margo says it's sad. So what about this is sad?
it's so long that you lose track of what they're even talking about to the very beginning. So, making it more precise.
Okay.
Looking at it's really broad.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, it's so broad and so long. I'm having asthma issues today, and there's so many ands in there. I was ready to cough and have breathing issues. There's my test if it's too much. So it's educating, it's caring, it's treatment, it's medication, it's how does it make a difference, and how it's too many purposes. And the language, you'll notice, is quite informal, too. I want to educate would not be the language of a purpose statement. Exactly. Whoops, could be someone's life purpose. Good point. And then example 3. In this study, surveys and semi-structured interviews will be used to investigate nurses' attitudes toward the effectiveness of common interventions and education tools to prevent the onset of diabetes mellitus type 2 in adults.
The method, who, what.
Yep. So it's survey and interviews. We've got the method. We've got nurses. And it's attitudes about something specific. So that's pretty good. It meets the criteria. But certainly there are ways you might tinker with it to make it better, but that's the idea. Okay. So we'll go back to purpose statements. I'm conscious of how much time we have left, but toward the end, if there's time, we may go back, and if someone would like to give a shot at now translating the question you have into a purpose statement, we'll try to do that. But the purpose has to fit within the context of that introduction we were talking about. And the length really varies depending on what kind of dissertation you're doing. I mean, some of these are a couple pages, and really your entire chapter 1 is an introduction to the whole study. It kind of overviews everything. But right now I'm talking about more the introduction to that chapter. It has to establish the context and what problem you're thinking about. So think about what makes you think that compassion may be an issue. What has been observed? What about the e-portfolios? What is it that you would need to explain in your intro to lay out the observation that you've made, or that through research you've made, and would show the inspiration for your research question? The intro would probably define some key terms. There's usually going to be some citation, but not for the purpose statement. That was a problem with that first example we saw. The purpose statement has to reflect you pulling together and expressing the whole point of your research. So that should not involve citation, but other parts of your intro certainly can. And then when you're proposing, this is all future tense. Nurses will be surveyed to determine, be that kind of language. So right now we're focusing on all these parts in the basic anatomy of your dissertation. There is going to be literature review all through, including in your intro, but of course there's also the discrete review of literature chapter. So here are a couple of links that I find very helpful, and I think it helps to think about why do we even do these? And with all of the graduate students I've worked with over the years, many of them tell me that they feel the literature review is the most difficult because you're trying to meld together all of these different voices and organize it. And there's a lot that can kind of go wrong with that. But you use that literature to really, when I say delimit, that's where you set parameters or boundaries. If you're looking at dentistry and you only want to look at rural dental practice or compare it to urban settings, or you're only looking at e-portfolios and a BSN program as opposed to something else. Those are delimitations, and reviewing literature can help you set those. It helps you understand the whole structure of the subject, and once you have your research question, it kind of suggests all the other questions that you need to review literature for. And that might be for defining terms, for exploring methodologies and comparing those, supporting any theoretical frameworks, understanding the variables, just synthesizing information, helping you argue significance. It does lots of things. But the common traps are that what we get is just a hodgepodge of citation. That's the biggest problem. A good literature review should be organized by topics, themes, or sometimes they're organized by methodology. Like you might have a qualitative section and a quantitative, or broken down some other way. And I want to show you an example of what I'm talking about here. If you attended the APA workshop earlier in the semester, or in the summer, you may have seen this already, but it gives you a good visual comparison of a successful and a not successful literature review. In this first one, we've got a heading, epidemiology, and we've got a citation, and we've got, this is the first paragraph within that section. You're noticing something, Margot.
I'm just thinking that's very similar to the literature review I recently read with my master's students.
And when you were reading those, Margot, were you happy to be reading that? Did you think they were doing the job they were supposed to do?
I told my kids, when you write, to me, it's no different than when I was in junior high. You have to have a topic sense. You have to somehow connect. So you can't just willy-nilly. And then Brenda had us this summer pick out a book, Destination Dissertation.
Yeah.
And so good. I've been using those methods recently. And it makes so much more sense to type out, randomly typing out these statements from these different, and then starting to put it together. And so to me, it's like, what is your topic? What is your topic sentence of that paragraph? And I think that we forget that we should go back to, in a way, to our basic writing.
That's exactly right. And this may well be what your rough draft looks like, and everybody understands that because it is so complicated. but what happens is it never gets to a higher level of, and I'm going to say storytelling, but that sounds, you know, we're writing more scientifically, but still it needs to have a coherent narrative. And here's a different example. Different topic though, and you see it has different components. Highlighted in purple, you see an actual topic sentence. And so there's some stuff before you ever see the first citation. And then all of the citations are used to bring together literature that says something about that topic sentence. And then we're going to bring in paragraph 2. This is not to say that, so now we're going to bring in a contrasting set of sources to talk about exceptions to what was just discussed. And that's what a literature review does, or should do. It starts with an idea that you pull together from your research, and then you pull in all the sources that are related, that they have something in common, they address that same thing. And you have transitions, and you have organization, and ideally you have headings within your literature review. Those are really great for keeping you on track, because that's how your whole research question breaks down. The headings will kind of be all the aspects in that literature review that need to be discussed. And then each section is like a report on that topic. So that's the coherence factor that's so often missing. I've got a few other things that may help with that, but first let's kind of just finish the overview of all the general parts. You have to talk methodology as well, and here is a great, I've got, this is the UNI citation here, but there's a book by Cresswell about research design, and I'm sure you're covering some of that in your classes as well, but having a language to talk about methods. And I think the biggest problem people run into is just not really taking a careful inventory of all their procedures. I see somebody out there has it and has found it really useful. That's great. So sometimes people just forget to mention and report on some really essential procedures in their research, and that's where just being very careful note taker is important. You'll have to have a section on significance. It can be great to kind of end the first chapter of your proposal by at least suggesting some potential significance, why this research matters, the important outcomes that may come of it. And we have a graduate student in clinical psychology who has provided a few tips for today as well. The first one, excuse me, I really love is when you start drafting, and this could apply to a class paper as well, if you physically take out all of the stuff you've cited, you should still have something left. If you don't, you have work to do, and we all do on those early rough drafts. That will show you exactly where you need to build in more control on your part as a writer to explain your sources, connect your sources, analyze your sources. Later in the dissertation, it's much more you as you're talking about what your findings meant. What are the implications of those? And so using different documents, the old note card system, I mean, it seems primitive, but it still works to do chunks of information on those, and she uses that. And I just wanted to show you quickly the importance of outlining. Do not underestimate either. And it doesn't have to have all the formal Roman numerals and all of that stuff. Just something to indicate what the major categories of information are and what goes underneath to support it. And you can see how she's investigating the issue of PTSD related to military sexual assault. And her outline starts pretty simple and generic, and now it's getting more and more fleshed out and even adding in the relevant citations within each section. That's how you build dissertation chapters, not by laboring over writing and, oh my gosh, it doesn't sound good. It's just one small building block at a time. And now you can see how she's taken her outline and is beginning to flesh out in paragraph form. The one on the left is pretty citation heavy and not real fleshed out. And now it's beginning to look more like a coherent essay. And we can even see headings added in. So that's just how things evolve in writing at this level. So I do want to spend a couple minutes talking about use of sources, because you have to deal with so many in a dissertation. And I know you've had other workshops and attention. We had the APA workshop, but at least some attention to avoiding any kinds of issues with plagiarism, and just keeping track of your citations. Because I remember in my dissertation I had to throw out certain things because I could not track down a source. I knew I had seen it somewhere, but nobody cares if you've seen it somewhere. You have to identify where. And so citing as you go, and not waiting until the end. I know you all have APA, and Marjorie's advice, check yourself before you wreck yourself. There can be uncertainty about citation, and all this is way down the line for you, so I just will spend a little more time talking more about what constitutes plagiarism beyond what I think everybody already knows. This is the one that's not terribly legible here, so I'm going to send it out. It's put out by Turnitin.com, and I know Alan now uses a similar system. SafeAssign, yeah. Okay. Well, the ones that I think are obvious, copying chunks of work, but you can't plagiarize yourself. You can't use work that you've already done and now call it, oh, it's my dissertation chapter, or it's a class paper and it's now my dissertation chapter.
So how does that work if it's not published?
Yeah, in publication it's easier to know that, because journals actually, the journal owners and publishers actually pretty much own your work. I can't even use my own articles that I've published in my teaching without certain permissions. But if you haven't published, it's up to you to maintain those ethics. What you can do, you can rework your own work significantly. You can ask instructors, you can say you tell them what you have and you can seek permission, but it is considered a form of plagiarism, and it's certainly addressed in UNI's plagiarism policy, that you can't take your own work or quote your own work without citation. And you can cite it as an unpublished work in APA, or you can, if it's reworked for a new purpose, then we're okay. But
I was going to say, I know that in our program here, that there are a lot of things that we work on that can feed into our dissertation. So going forward, I mean, granted, a lot of the stuff we're doing is more from a broad perspective, but then again, I guess you are reworking it. But I know that has been one of my colleagues, not in this program, but in a different program, have those questions too. So of course, go to the APA manual, and it's not
on that issue,
that's clear on plagiarism. And if you look up the definition, it's that's such a huge gray area. So.
And it is, and you bring up a good point, because in a doctoral program, ideally, you are creating things that will eventually feed into your. Now that's a different thing. If an instructor has designed assignments specifically to be the building blocks to a dissertation and you're creating those within your doctoral program, absolutely. That's the ideal, that you're building those ideas as you go, and that an assignment that was developed for that purpose could serve as a piece of chapter 1. It's more works that were done for totally different purposes. That's different. And even Turnitin.com has an online quiz. You can just Google Turnitin quiz if you.
Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, we've done that before. But that's where it's not always real clear. I mean, I can understand if Brenda has us do a research paper on ethics, and then another professor has us do another in a different course, a research paper on ethics, and I took the one from Brenda's course and just now gave it
put a date on it. Yeah.
That to me would definitely be plagiarism. So I think it's, again, I think, like we said, the safest bet is to go back to your instructors and clarify with that, because I think we've done that with you in the past and other things.
And that's certainly what Turnitin suggests too, is that a lot of it is what permission is an instructor willing to grant. But one of the quiz questions that almost or more than half of all the people who have done it online have missed is the one about collaboration. One of the questions is, let's say you kind of divide the labor. One person does a piece of literature review research and the other does another. You share notes, but you each write your own literature review. That's on this handout as unauthorized collaboration. Again, a way to avoid that problem is to ask an instructor, or sometimes collaboration is invited and it's part of the assignment. But I had a case in a class that I taught recently where 2 people turned in something really, really similar, and they had collaborated on the research and then the writing. They, in their minds, were writing their own, but it was so similar that, yeah, so that didn't work so well. So one of the other things I'll mention quickly is that sometimes we think that we're paraphrasing a source, but all we're really doing is we're following the same original order. We're tinkering with the words, probably finding some synonyms and replacing some things. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because we're running out of time here, but that is also a kind of plagiarism. And so when you get this handout, you can kind of read, Turnitin gives them some new clever names with some graphics, but the point is that you can have absolutely proper citation. In this case, there is no parenthetical citation, which is wrong, which is bad. But you may have it, but it's still so close to the original, it's too much. So
if I were to try to paraphrase, can't figure out how to paraphrase it because it said the way it is. If I switch a word, though, I can't quote it. Is that correct?
Well,
if like one word is switched, or if it's, because I know that's always been confusing, so I just quote it.
Yeah, well, there's a couple issues. Sometimes you have to change a word, let's say one word within a quote, in order to get it to fit grammatically or because it won't make sense. And then we can use brackets to indicate a substitution. We can indicate with ellipses the dot, dot, dot that we cut something out. But if you just change a word and then drop the quote marks, then you're in trouble. Yeah.
I can't figure out how to change it.
Right. Now, on the other hand, this could look like plagiarism because there's some words repeated from the original, but those words are just naming the subjects, like rapid prototyping and computer-based instruction. You're not plagiarizing if you're simply naming the thing. It's when you're getting into descriptors and what about those things. So in that case, it would not be plagiarism. And then just a couple of quick tips. It's so darned easy to cut and paste these days that a lot of things are internet plagiarism. And it helps to just, if you're doing that, change the colors, typeface, highlight them, do something to section off things that you know are too close to the original. I did a lot of that in my dissertation. I love quotes. I'm quote happy. I just love fascinating word choice, and I use too many of them. So when I knew that I was sticking too close, I just highlighted it, and I knew then that I had to go back and rework extensively. But for the time being, they were there and they helped me build my project, but I knew that I had to get a grip and go back. And by the time I revised many, many, many times and reorganized and did everything that needed to be done, it got farther and farther away from that original source, and there was no longer any, and plus the citation. And then of course common knowledge doesn't need a citation, but there's not much of that. And we're referring not to what everybody knows, but it's more the major facts and theories within your field. But most things will be cited, and just do it if you're not sure. There is a slide here because we were talking about the issue of what a paraphrase is. In dissertation research, you're probably not going to be doing your job unless you're reading some articles that are really difficult to get through. They're just challenging, or there's sections of them. And so here is a process you can use. First comes from good reading strategy, translating words you don't know, marking up. I think it's really important to have in hand hard copies of articles that you've printed. I understand about trees and all of that. Or there are some very good applications for iPad and other notebooks where you can download, where you can store your PDFs. I have to mark on them though. You can, many of those now you can, there's one I like, is called Notability. I can actually do handwritten notes on my screen with a stylus, or I can attach a note by typing and it'll be stored in there. I just can't quite, it's still not quite the same. But it honestly helps with digesting the whole thing. If you can mark up an article, you can highlight, you can make notes, you can translate. And then a process of looking away, putting things in what you think are your own words, kind of mapping it out so that it's organized, fleshing it out, and then going back to check your accuracy. And it also helps to remember to always blend things together by referring to the authors when you're dealing with authors. It's not all in the citation. So-and-so reported, so-and-so explained. Those little signal phrases really make a difference. So that will be in your packet. There are just a few quick slides about if you're borrowing tables or long quotes, all that has to be cited, and if you think there's any chance of you being published with this, then you'll need to actually request permission from the copyright holder. And that's often different from the author, so just a few. There are some things that are free use. There's a list of them here. Old things before 1923, things with labels like public domain or open license. And as we kind of finish up here, I have to just talk a bit about the writing process at the other end. Absolutely up front, it's all about making a mess, getting ideas out, and then over time, working them, reworking them, making them over, just like you did with those research questions. And it's really fun to see some of those transformed before our very eyes here in this workshop. They get they're getting clearer, more finely tuned, more precise. That's what has to happen so many times with a dissertation. I can't tell you how many revisions I had on some of my dissertation. I couldn't count because there were that many, and I'm a writing coordinator. But it's so complicated. You will see mine with arrows up the sides and things boxed off to move to other chapters, and just a total hot mess until you get down to the little, word changes, maybe I'm adding punctuation. It gets cleaner and cleaner and cleaner. But marking up those hard copies over and over again until it gets more and more clear and connected. And I'm going to recommend a book to you, and this is a quote from that book. Many dissertations have the problem of they're just hard to read. They don't gesture back to what they have said or forward to what they plan to say. And I think making those connections, that's among the hardest work of a dissertation. So I love this little book because it's thin, it's pretty cheap as books go. It's called They Say, I Say, and it addresses some of the issues that you see here. But lots of examples about how you can engage with your sources in a way that's both objective and represents them fairly, but also expands on them with your own analysis, your own ideas, and how you separate the two, and how you be clear and make those connections. And those are in the slides. So there is a checklist in here about some of the many things you need to review many times with the precision of the scientist under a microscope once we're talking about, and this is all after you have your content drafted and approved, and it's a constant going back and forth. A quick thing about the language you use. It's important to avoid things like, this study will do something. That's what anthropomorphism is. It's giving a human quality to a research project. People can examine things and explore things. So you can cite them. I don't know if you can say I in your program. In this study, I will examine. That is often up to, in some programs, yes, you can. In others, absolutely, you cannot. Okay. And sometimes there are ways around it. A passive sentence, the relationship between this and that was examined. That's the thing about passive sentences, who did it? And so avoiding clutter and being clear. Someone in the pre-survey mentioned passive sentences, clumsy sentences. I have an example for you here that I would invite you to work out on your own. It's from an actual paper I received last semester. There are lots of opportunities in it to be more precise, more streamlined, and just to cut. It's like cutting, if you cook and you trim the fat off a piece of meat, it's kind of like that. It's just getting rid of anything that doesn't really contribute to content. Some areas to look at. There is the goal. There is and there are. Almost never have a reason to exist in your writing. You don't need them. There's always something specific you can move to the front to say instead. I hope. I believe. Look for repetition. If made aware of the many negative side effects, it can help lessen the side effects. If choosing to use medication, and who's choosing? If as a follow-up to this, if it's been a concern for you that Yeah, you tend to be kind of cluttery in your writing and your instructors are commenting on it. I would be fine if you'd like to give a shot at revising this and just send it along. I could send out some feedback to everybody or kind of an ideal version revised just to show you how much this could be trimmed down. The more you do that, the more it tunes you into your own writing. Kind of the practice is what gives you that laser vision about, oh, I said this, I can cut this, I can rearrange this, I can replace this with something much more precise. And passive voice, someone had mentioned that, so I just will quickly give you an example. A new system of orientation will be offered to all new doctoral students. Okay. Who will offer? If we answer that question, our vision could sound like this. The Writing Center will offer a new orientation program. Or zombies, yeah. Zombies will offer. Someone, who? And so the active voice makes clear who is doing what. And that's why most of the time it's preferable. Sometimes you can use a passive sentence strategically, and it's a good thing, but should be rare. And so, in conclusion, I think the idea of baby steps fits the dissertation process more than anything else. You can always do a little something toward it, and just having these questions now it looks very exciting to me because I know that you have direction and everything else comes from that. So if you would like to follow up by getting feedback on something specific, like I say, I'll be available for that through the end of the semester. So if anyone wants to hang around to submit the last question or two, Brenda, is that okay? Otherwise? All right. Okay. All right. I wish you the best on your project.